and welcome to Swayam MOOC on British Poetry and Drama, 14th to 17th century. I'm Dr. Vandana Rajoriya, and it's such a pleasure to be with you all again. In our last lecture, we stood in this storm with three witches. We heard their prophecy echo across a Scottish heath. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. All hail Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter. We watched a noble warrior receive the seeds of his own destruction. We saw ambition stir very deeply, loudly in a loyal heart, and we witnessed Macbeth's first aside, where he already has imagined that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix his hair. Today, we witness the harvest of those seeds. In the next two sessions, Act 1, Scene 7th and Act 2, Scene 1, we'll watch a noble person, a virtuous person transform into a murderer, not through ignorance, not through madness, but through choice. Yes, up till now we have seen Macbeth yielding to the temptation, but he's still considering and reconsidering. But as you dive into these scenes, what you find is one of the most psychologically penetrating scenes in the entire history of literature. Here, Shakespeare doesn't just show us what Macbeth does, how he decides, but he also shows us how his mind works as he moves from moral clarity to moral blindness, from conscience to corruption. So, from hero to husband conspiring with his highly ambitious wife. Today, we enter into the laboratory of human soul to examine the anatomy of moral collapse. We ask those questions that have been haunting every generation, including ours. The question, how do you understand how good people yield to terrible things? How people whom we think to be noble yield to corruption, fall, in their actions. By the end of this lecture, you'll be able to analyze the psychological progression of the action of the play as well as of Macbeth's moral reasoning in these crucial scenes. You'll be able to understand how Shakespeare portrays the relationship between ambition and conscience, and there is a deep relationship. We'll also be able to evaluate Lady Macbeth's role as the chief catalyst apart from the witches in her husband's transformation, and we'll examine the literary techniques Shakespeare uses to show internal conflict. So prepare for understanding all these characters, including Lady Macbeth, to understand how we yield to ambition and then, become corrupt and perform guilt. Let us begin where conscience and ambition meet in the mortal combat. Act 1, Scene 7th. This is the scene where you witness a great debate happening. It is Macbeth's castle and, it is already yielding to horrid suggestions. So, Act 1, Scene 7th basically opens with King Duncan now dining in Macbeth's castle. And as Duncan is dining, he is Macbeth's honored guest. Macbeth is harboring thoughts of murder of the very men whom he is expected to protect. So as Duncan is dining, Macbeth is contemplating at this man breaking bread at his table. And Macbeth steps into an aside to think, and we hear his thoughts away from the feast, away from the king, away from his wife, alone with his conscience. And he's struggling. He's considering the question whether it is noble to kill Duncan. And he says, If it were done when it is done, then it were well if it were done quickly. Most passionately haunting and beautiful lines of literature. If it were done when it is done, then it were well if it were done quickly. This isn't the voice of a villain. This is voice of a man who understands that actions bring consequences. That murder isn't just an event. It is the beginning of an endless chain of violence and guilt and retribution. He's saying, what does it mean? If I could kill Duncan and have it truly be finished, no consequences, no guilt, no revenge, then I should do it very quickly. But he knows better, he understands, he knows that it is impossible. Watch the working of his psyche, watch his moral reasoning. He proceeds further and he reflects, he says, but in these cases, we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught return to plague the inventor. Macbeth understands very, very powerfully that what he is doing will basically teach people. So if he kills the king and claims power, then he is also teaching a lesson that kings can be murdered, and others will soon learn this lesson from him and follow. What he does to Duncan, someone else will maybe one day do to him. This is sophisticated political moral thinking. Macbeth isn't just considering one murder, he's also considering the precedent it sets. The very lesson that will later haunt him when he fears everything, every subject, every shadow, and the murder of dance and death plays. But then his analysis goes deeper. He goes deeper and he says he's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed, then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. He is thinking about the sacred bonds, the sacred rules of hospitality. If he murders Duncan, 3 sacred bonds would be violated. Kingship, Duncan is his cousin, so he is a kin. Then bond of loyalty, Duncan is his king. Then bond of hospitality, Duncan is his guest. In Macbeth's world, these aren't just social conventions, they are sacred trusts, always to be kept, never broken. To break them isn't just wrong, it is an offense against the whole natural order of the entire universe. Macbeth continues to think, and then comes the spiral dimension. Besides this, Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, had been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. Duncan has been a noble king, a virtuous king, a great king, and what you find here is one of the most beautiful passages in Shakespeare. Duncan's virtues will cry out like angels with trumpets. The murder will bring deep damnation, not just punishment, but spiritual, moral, total destruction. This is not an ordinary individual. This is a deeply moral, virtuous soldier thinking, meditating upon the consequences of the murder he is planning. Macbeth keeps on thinking further and he says, and pity, like a naked newborn babe, striding the blast or heaven's cherubim horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye. The tears shall drown the wind. Look at the wordplay. Beautiful magic, enchanting music created by the words. So, when he murders the innocent, pity itself, like a naked newborn woman, pure, innocent, will, spread the horror of the murders to everybody, to every eye. Whole world will weep. This is deeply moral imagination at its work. Macbeth can see with terrible clarity the full horror of what he is contemplating. And this is the reason why he qualifies to be a hero. He is so brilliantly noble and rooted in humanity in the initial lines. He is reflecting on what is right to do. After this sophisticated moral analysis, he offers a justification of what he'll do. He says, I have no spur, mark it, I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition which overleaps itself and falls on the other. So he thinks of a horse who overleaps itself and falls. And he says, this is just ambition, vaulting ambition, ambition that leaps too high, and such ambition destroys itself. He knows it is inadequate. He knows that ambition alone cannot justify regicide, betrayal and domination. But he names it honestly. This is what makes Macbeth's fall so tragic and so instructive. He doesn't commit evil because he thinks it's good, it's okay, it's normal. He doesn't murder Duncan because he believes he is justified in doing it. He contemplates the evil hidden fully understanding its deep evil nature. So this is moral corruption in its purest form. The choice to do wrong despite knowing the right path. And it is this very moral awareness that will later drive him into paranoid tyranny, because a man who knows he has done wrong can never trust that others won't do the same to him. Then comes Lady Macbeth. Just when Macbeth has decided that he is not going to kill Duncan, he is not having any spur except his vaulting ambition, which is not justified, Lady Macbeth arrives and changes everything. We know from our previous scene that she has vowed that she knew this already, that Macbeth's heart is too full of milk of human kindness, and therefore she will have to poison his ear, she'll have to push him. And she says, he has almost subbed. Why have you left the chamber? She is asking, confronting Macbeth, why is he not here? She immediately sees that he is wavering, and she moves to shore up his resolve. What her steady strategy at work, psychologically brilliant in these lines. She exhorts Macbeth, was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? Hath it slept since? And wakes it now, look so green and pale? And what it did so freely? She is arguing not about the morality of the deed. Remember, she understands it is immoral and no question of moral immoral. She is questioning Macbeth's consistency. She is making his moral qualms appear as weakness, cowardice, failure of character. Now, this is first principle of moral corruption. Transform ethical questions into personal one, and we marvel at her shrewd cunningness. Instead of asking, is this right? She makes him ask, am I strong enough? Instead of asking, what are the consequences? What will be the consequences? She asks, are you the same man who wanted this before? From this time, such I account thy love. Art thou afraid to be the same in thine own act and valor as thou art in desire? She is weaponizing love itself. And remember, the letter scene tells us both are deeply in love. He couldn't wait to tell her about the witches and the prophecy. If he doesn't murder Duncan, it means he doesn't love her truly. This is what she says. If he retreats from the plan, he is a coward. Now, no warrior can bear the title of coward. This is the same woman who will later, yield to madness. At present, what is she saying? My dearest partner of greatness, she basically is using partnership as a weapon. But this is not all. Now comes her master stroke, and it is one of the most shocking speeches in the entire history of Shakespearean literature. She says, I have given suck. And remember, this tells us that she has been a mother. I have given suck and know how tender it is to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plugged my gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this. Unimaginable. This is perhaps the most disturbing image in all of Shakespeare. A mother describing how she would murder her own nursing innocent infant. Why does Shakespeare give her these words? First, the emotional shock overwhelms all rational analysis. The horror of the image makes Duncan's murder seem less extreme by comparison. Second, it establishes her as utterly without moral restraint. If she could kill her own child, innocent infant child, what wouldn't she do? Third, it reframes the murder not as a violation of sacred bonds, but as the keeping of sacred promises. But most importantly, it reveals the complete corruption of love. Lady Macbeth has taken the most fundamental human bond, mother and the child, and perverted it into an argument for a murder. This shows us how moral corruption spreads. It doesn't just abandon virtue, it uses virtue itself as a weapon against the virtue, using the logic to perform something which is the exact opposite of it. This is the same woman who in her later scene had called the spirits to unsex her, and now we know why she prayed it, to called for the direst cruelty. Here in this moment, she basically becomes the architect of her husband's fall. And when we look at her, we feel she is but evil personified. And when we watch how with ruthlessness, cold blood, she is in a position to suggest all that, and she says she planned the murder, execute everything. This makes Lady Macbeth seem to be a perfect villain and Macbeth just a victim. And by now she has prepared. She says, I have wined the chamberlains so that they are now drunk dead, and they are so drunk that she says that memory, the water of the brain, shall be a fume for every moral objection. She provides a practical solution. Worried about the guards? Drug them. Worried about evidence? Plant the daggers on them. Worried about failure? Here's the plan. By systematically addressing each practical concern, she eliminates the external supports for Macbeth's moral position. She makes ethical considerations appear as only obstacles, and she removes them all. How Macbeth responds? He says, I am settled and bent up, each corporeal agent to this terrible fate. Away, and mark the time with fairest show, false face must hide what the false heart doth know. My goodness, false faith must hide what the false heart doth know. Terrible. He calls it a terrible fate, and then he says he hasn't, basically he hasn't overcome his moral objections. He has simply decided what Lady Macbeth suggested, to ignore them, not to attend to them. And when he says this phrase, false face must hide what the false heart doth know, he's executing this only. And these lines will echo throughout the play. It is just the beginning of the performance that will consume both him and his wife. The very performance that will drive Lady Macbeth to madness later on, when she can no longer maintain the mask. This is crucial. Moral collapse doesn't require the elimination of moral awareness. It only requires the decision to act against it. So, when you look at this scene in entirety, you basically get to understand deep, understanding of Shakespeare about stages of moral corruption and root of moral corruption. Then comes the famous dagger scene. Act 2, scene 1, it is past midnight and Macbeth is contemplating Duncan's murder while the whole castle sleeps. Macbeth is moving through darkened corridors towards Duncan's chamber, and then he sees something. Let us watch the soliloquy. Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. So basically it is a hallucination, ghostly dagger. So while he sees it, he just cannot handle it. And when you look at the famous dagger soliloquy, you reflect on this. What has changed since Act 1, Scene 7? Almost everything. In the previous scene, Macbeth engaged in sophisticated moral reasoning. He was a noble hero who weighed the consequences, analyzed the obligations, considered spiritual implications of his actions. But now, his mind has narrowed to obsessive focus on the mechanics of murder, where before he thought about consequences, now he thinks about instruments. Where before he analyzed morality, now he fixates on methodology. The hallucinated dagger is crucially symbolic. It represents the corruption of imagination itself. Imagination which is now divorced from moral reasoning, suggesting very important lesson for all of us to remember. Imagination should help us envision consequences, consider alternatives and engage in moral reflection. Only then it is meaningful. But now Macbeth's imagination produces only fantasies that support his evil purpose. Art thou not fatal vision sensible, he says, to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat oppressed brain? Notice, he can still distinguish reality from the hallucination. He knows the dagger isn't real. But this rational awareness can't save him, because he has now lost the capacity to use rational thinking, rational awareness in an ethical manner. This is the essence of moral blindness. So what we see here is Macbeth's, walk from moral corruption to moral blindness, absolute moral blindness, not just the loss of rational faculties, but entire redirection of these faculties to immoral purposes. What does he say? I see thee yet in form as palpable as this which now I draw. She draws the sword. Thou marshallest me the way that I was going, and such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses, or else with all the rest I see thee, and thy blade and dozen gouts of blood, which was not so before. Now blood is appearing on the phantom blades. Hallucination is intensifying. As the blood appears on the blade, his corrupted imagination feeds on it, creating increasingly vivid, murderous purpose, even more, powerful. And then comes his most extraordinary passage of the scene. He says, "Now over the one half world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtained slave. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings, and withered murder, alarmed by his sentinel, the wolf, whose howls his watch, thus with his stealthily pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides toward the design, moves like a ghost." Macbeth here is placing his action within a spiritual framework. He imagines himself as part of the cosmic drama of evil. Remember? Witchcraft, murder personified, legendary crimes. This is how the psychological defense mechanism works. By making his crime seem part of a larger supernatural order, supernatural forces, Macbeth is attempting to escape personal moral responsibility. He is not just a man choosing to murder his king. He is a participant in cosmic evil, driven by forces beyond ordinary moral evaluation. Now, this reference to Tarquin's ravishing strides, it is particularly important because Tarquin was the legendary Roman king who labeled Lucrece, one of the history's most notorious crimes. Macbeth is consciously aligning himself with that legendary evil. This shows how moral corruption often involves not just abandoning virtue, but also connecting it with other wrongs, not just doing wrong, but identifying with wrongdoing itself. And then the bell rings. Bell is basically a suggestion by Lady Macbeth that he should now move. And he says, "I go," and it is done. The bell invites me. "Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell." I'm reminded of the lines, "Don't ask for whom the bell tolls, for it tolls for thee." This scene basically is very powerful, contrasting it with the previous scene we discussed. If it were done when it is done, then it were well if it were done quickly. And now what he says, it is done, not just I will do it, but it is done. In his mind, the deed is already complete. And notice his final words about Duncan, that summons thee to heaven, not to hell. He's transformed murder into a kind of divine judgment, divine predicament, with himself as just the agent of cosmic order, cosmic justice. This is the ultimate corruption of moral imagination, the transformation of evil into apparent good or murder into judgment, of sin into service. But what he doesn't yet know is that this same guilt, this same blood will return to haunt him. And not only him, but also his wife. Where Lady Macbeth once said, "A little water clears us of this deed," later on she will cry, "All the perfumes of Arabia cannot sweeten this little hand." The crucial insight which Macbeth's transformation gives is this: moral collapse rarely involves sudden transformation. Moral collapse rarely involves sudden transformation. Remember, it usually occurs through gradual habituation to ethical compromise. People do not wake up one morning deciding to become corrupt. They make small compromises, small shifts from ethical to unethical, and that gradually expands into serious misconduct as their capacity for moral reasoning becomes increasingly compromised, confused. Now, understanding this progression is crucial both for individual moral development and also for organizational ethics. It basically suggests that maintaining moral clarity requires not just knowledge of ethical principles, but also a deep, active commitment to moral reasoning, even when such reasoning produces unwelcome conclusions. With this, we come to an end of our discussions of Macbeth. Through our session, we have very beautifully understood and diagnosed and dissected the very psyche of, transformation from, morality to corruption. So, we have watched through these discussions how a noble man, virtuous man, good man gradually yields to temptation, ambition and transforms into a murderer. We have seen how ambition can corrupt conscience. We have witnessed the precise moment when moral reasoning surrenders to obsessive desire. But perhaps the most important lesson from this session is this: Macbeth's tragedy lies not in its inevitability, but in its preventability. Throughout both scenes, we can identify moments when Macbeth could have made different choices and then it could have led to different outcomes. When moral clarity briefly reasserted Macbeth, we could see how, a noble heart initially dwelt in it. But when the path to virtue was deserted by him, then gradually the comeback became an impossibility. These scenes serve not just to discourage ethical aspirations. As we complete, our discussions of this play, we'll know this, but they also illuminate resources and strategies necessary for maintaining moral integrity under pressure. So, understanding Macbeth, understanding these scenes basically is an understanding of how virtue can be preserved and saved. And this is the reason why Macbeth by Shakespeare is basically a play which gives us deep insights into, psychology of the mind. Shakespeare provides not just literary entertainment, but he also provides us with deep practical wisdom about the nature of moral choices and the conditions under which ethical behavior becomes, possible or also impossible. In our next lecture, we'll return to her. We'll turn our full attention to this character, Lady Macbeth herself. We'll explore her own character's arc from the ambitious woman who rejects femininity to gain power to the guilt-ridden figure who sleepwalks through her final scene. We'll see how the very qualities that made her powerful, timorous, and will ultimately destroy her. Until then, keep reading Macbeth scene by scene, line by line. Join me next time and we'll talk about Lady Macbeth, gender, guilt and psychology of power. This is all for today. Thank you. See you in the next session.